Okay, so welcome to Effective Parent Advocacy. We're already in progress working with your child's IEP team. Margaret Johnston and I have introduced ourselves. We are parents of children with disabilities, and we're here with our tribe talking about how to be an effective advocate. So today we hope that you will leave here knowing what is an advocate, what are the skills and strategies needed to be an effective parent advocate, techniques to use before, during, and after your next IEP, whether it is in person or virtual, and why collaboration is the key. We have that in capital letters, the key to successful advocacy at all times. So what is an advocate? An advocate is someone who pleads the cause of another or promotes the interest or the cause, the interests of a cause or group. So you advocate every day. If you've ever met with your child's teacher to talk about an issue or questioned a medical professional on issues concerning yourself or your child, or even asked where something is in a store, or contested a bill at a restaurant, if you've done any of these things, you already are an advocate. Margaret, anything to add to that? Or I might just turn it over to you to talk about skills and strategies.
I'll just go on with skills and strategies. So we have listed 8 separate skills and strategies, and I'm not going to read off the screen, but we will go through each one of these individually. And I just want to mention that the last one we get to is actually one of the most important, which is practice self-care. So we'll come back to that at the end. So the first one is use your understanding of your child, because you know your child best. And sometimes you think that because the IEP has a disability listed, that means that the teachers will understand how that disability impacts them. And that's not necessarily the case. As we know, ADHD affects kids differently. Learning disabilities affect kids differently. Autism affects different kids differently. So using your own understanding is important. So, your experiences are valuable and may be used to improve things, but only if you share the information you have and your understanding with the team. And you usually know when something is or isn't working, both at home and at school. And you may have some very good ideas about how to make things better. So, it's important for you to think about your contribution being important. We like to say on the IEP team, you may have an expert in special education. You may have an expert in speech and language disorders or OT, but the person who's the expert about your child is you. And so that's your expertise, and you have to bring it to the table. And so how your child's disability affects him or her, and you know how this disability manifests itself in your own child. And it's possible that your child has an unusual or rare disability, and the teaching staff may not be familiar with it. And then it becomes your job to educate them about that disability. And I know sometimes we feel like that shouldn't have to be our job. The educator should know that. But we do have a tougher job of parenting, and we have this other job of learning all these different bureaucratic processes. And sometimes teaching the team is part of what we have to do.
If I can just say, I'm not even sure we have this in this training, but my daughter has Prader-Willi syndrome, which is rare. So what we began doing is a 1-pager at the beginning of the year, which just says, this is Prader-Willi syndrome, this is how it manifests itself. And we found that teachers and staff were very grateful for that. And then when we saw that they were grateful and they were actually hungry for information, we would give them more. But we'd start with just that 1 page. So if anybody out there, and that doesn't have to be with just a rare syndrome either. That could be with the, with the more common ASD or ADHD, what it is, how it manifests itself.
So when we put this presentation together, it was when COVID was starting and everybody was going into distance learning. And you probably had better part of a year of distance learning last year. We're not sure, everybody's district is a little different. And you may still be in distance learning, or you may have your child may be back in the classroom. But one thing to think about is, did you keep a journal of what was working and what isn't working or wasn't working while they were in distance learning, where your teacher was not having the same level of contact they would in school? Um, did you take videos of your child learning to illustrate what was working or not working? These are things that you can do and you can still do if they will provide valuable information. One note about videos: if your child is on Zoom learning, you can't video the classroom or anything that shows the teacher or another child. So that isn't something you can do without explicit uh, permission. But you can take a video of your kid trying to do their homework if that will show something about the way they work. Um, did you share your observations and thoughts with teachers and the IEP team? And, this is something that's always important. Sometimes kids do fine during the school day or appear to be doing fine, and then they come home and melt down every night after school. The teachers don't know that unless you tell them. That's important information, and it's an indication that there's a lot of stress or discomfort going on at school that they may not be aware of. So things like that you're observing that the school may not be observing, it's important to communicate that. And the other thing to note is that your observations of your child's progress during the time of COVID, when the services weren't as robust as they have been at other times, your observations about your child's progress towards their IEP goals may help with receiving services to remediate learning losses. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but all of the schools have gotten some extra money to help deal with learning loss due to COVID. And so the extent to which whatever learning loss took place can be documented, the more chance you have of getting some remedial services. So in any case, any information you have, you should share with the team. And we're going to give you some examples of uh, things you can do to help record uh, what's going on at home and what your observations are. And if you have concerns about a particular IEP goal your child is working on, do talk with the teacher and get specifics about how progress on that goal is being monitored, because the school is supposed to be monitoring progress on all of the IEP goals. So now this is probably sort of hard to read on the screen because the print is small. But what I wanted to indicate to you is that, and I'm going to look over here to the side where I can see it a little bit better, that this is just something we came up with as an example. It's not something you have to use. It's just something to think about. So, was your child able to sit through an online class? Yes or no? How long did they focus on the class? If it was a 45-minute class, were they focused the entire time or only for 5 or 10 minutes? Did you have to sit with them and redirect them towards their work? And if so, how many times, how often? How did your child participate? Did they ask questions? Did they, uh, pay attention, or were they trying to amuse themselves and talk to the other kids? Then, this is only those observations we put up there for distance learning, but think about working with your child on homework. Was their child able to complete their homework independently? Yes or no? Did they understand the work they were being given? Did they come home with a worksheet that they knew how to work on? Or did they come home with a worksheet and you sat down with them and they said, "Mom, I have no idea what to do," or "Dad, can you explain to me how to do this because I just don't get it"? Did they understand? How much help did you have to give them? Were they able to complete the work? What percentage? And then observations. This is my kid. Sam threw down his books and broke his pencil when asked to start his homework. After 15 minutes of cajoling, reminding him he could go outside after he did his homework, he agreed to do the work if I sat with him. After he got started, he seemed to enjoy the word search worksheets and was proud of how many words he could recognize. This sounds like this. I put this up here because this sounds like how my kid participated in class. But there's other ways you can observe these, and you know, just write down your observations in some form. You can keep a little notebook, a journal. You can use a form, just something that helps keep track of what's going on with your child, especially at the times when the teacher is not with them, when you're working with them. This is another real busy worksheet that we got from um, a website called Captain. Captain is the California Autism Professional Training and Information Network. There's information on this website that is useful for other disabilities as well as autism as well. It was designed for kids with autism. But this is an example of some of the observations you can make about how your child is doing. It was created to help parents integrate everyday activities at home with your child's goals. And so that's something that might be useful to you. Again, you'll get this in the printout from the PDF from this presentation. So if you can't read all of these words on the screen, that's okay. And then perhaps, when you go through this, you might share the information with your child's teachers to make sure that they are understanding what's going on and how it could be helpful to them in the classroom. So these are just a couple of examples, and you may very well find other ways to observe your child's skills and progress and give that information to the IEP team. So we mentioned Captain. It's a website with a wealth of information, even if your child experiences a different disability than autism. And it's set up in a format of Padlets. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but basically it's a way of providing a lot of different information. And they also have information on transitioning back to school, which is something probably many of you have already gone through recently. So then we're going to talk about systems and key players. So it's important to know who you're working with and what part of the disability services puzzle those people are playing. So, who do you need to learn about? What players do you need to identify? Well, school districts, directors of special education, program managers, principals, teachers, a lot of people in the education field. And I hope all of you are familiar with this term, SELPA, Special Education Local Plan Area. SELPA is a state-mandated consortium that provides for all the special ed services of children living within its boundaries. And if you click on this link in the PDF you get, it will show you what the SELPA is for your area. Usually they're set up by counties, but not always. Some of them have different, a different configuration than a county. Now, each SELPA also has a community advisory committee. And the community advisory committee is generally made up of parents and teachers, and they're committed to trying to advise the SELPA on how to make special education work in their community and to work better if improvements need to be made. So it's advice to those people who are running things. California Department of Education, and we've listed a lot of links here, but definitely go to the California Department of Education website and check out some of the information they have. California Safe Schools for All, California Department of Public Health, all of these people have interests in school, in safety, COVID health. So get to know where you can find this kind of information. Social Security Administration. Not all of your kids will qualify for Social Security SSI, but some will. So it's important to find out what's available there. Then other supports that could be possible. If your child is a regional center client, then you may qualify for in-home support services. If your child has a severe disability such as autism, epilepsy, cerebral palsy, they may be a regional center client or be eligible for regional center services. So that's something to be aware of. Mental health resources, we have a listing of those. Especially become familiar with your county mental health and human services department if your child has any kind of emotional or social needs that are associated with their disability. You can reach out to your child's case manager for every different agency that you interact with. So it's important to know who that case manager is. And it's quite common for us to talk to parents who have no idea who their child's case manager is at school. Usually it's their special ed teacher, but it could be somebody else. So find out who's considered your child's case manager. And every organization you interact with also has a director or a decision maker who sits above that case manager. So if you're having problems dealing with a case manager, there's somebody that they report to that you can talk to. So, and if you're having trouble with any of this and need more help figuring out how to interact with these agencies, please do call us. We do have a helpline. The phone number is listed here and on our website. You know, we have lots of information on the website and via phone conversation with us. So do reach out. And at this point, I think, Alyssa, you're going to take over.
I am. Thank you, Margaret. I always learn something new, you know, when I hear Margaret give that training, because it's and it's always good. Like I said, always learning. 23 years old, always learning. So things change, you know, weekly, actually daily in the special education world. It's hard to keep up, but we try. And next slide, please. A good way to keep up is to visit our website and our newsletters. We really try and put what's current going on in special education. If it's not the theme of the newsletter, we at least try and put a link in there and a sentence or two, so it lets you see what's happening. Your school website may also be a good source of information, and the SELPA websites are often very good sources of information. This school and college legal services update, they're actually out of Santa Rosa. They consult with a number of school districts. We know they do with Sonoma County. Their updates apply to California law in general. If you're out of state, it may or may not apply to you. For example, in July of 2020, we found out from SCLS that IEPs have to describe how special education and related services will be provided during emergency conditions. That was something that was new, that was put in July of 2020 because obviously of the pandemic. National disability groups are good sources of information, as is Wrights Law. If you don't know what Wrights Law is, please do go to that website and check it out. Very good source, especially for those, you know, invisible disabilities, the ADHD, the dyslexias, the DIS groups. I'll have more links for them later in this presentation. And then there's Disability Rights California, which has been protecting and advancing the rights of individuals with diverse abilities in California for over 40 years. They have easy to read publications and information, and we actually refer to what we consider the Bible, the Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual, and that is downloadable in chapters online. It's a Q&A, and it's practically every question you could think of. They give you an answer to, and they give you codes, California code sightings, so you can actually go in and investigate a little bit deeper. Okay, one of the big things that happened this summer was California law AB 130 and its impact on special education. And again, there's a link there. You can go and look at the whole thing. We'll talk about a few other things a little bit later on, but one of the bigger issues is this independent study being the way that students can pursue distance learning in this school year of 2021 to 2022. There are some general guidance that the California Department of Education put out. The links are there. That's a general overview of it. And this has caused so many questions and so many concerns for so many parents that CDE has even made a specific independent study email and a phone number for folks to call if you're having some real issues. Of course, you can always call us, but again, we provide you resources.
Yeah, and I'm going to interject just a little bit here. So if your child has some kind of health concern that you believe means they must stay at home rather than go to in-person school classes at this time, it may be that the school district will say, okay, they can do independent study. And we all know that most kids that have IEPs, independent study isn't a good choice. So you have to think seriously about whether, if your child has a health concern, whether it's serious enough that you think they ought to stay home rather than actually going to in-person learning. If your child has a serious health concern and your child's doctor agrees that they should not be in school and in-person learning, you might talk about home instruction as a placement in the IEP rather than independent study. And these two things are actually quite different. Independent study is a program that's set up for kids who are able to do study independently. It's not really designed for kids with learning needs. Whether home instruction is a placement by the IEP team if your child has serious health concerns, and this could include mental health concerns. So think about if your child is in-person learning, this doesn't really apply, but if they are for some reason needing to stay home, this is a situation you really need to think through clearly with the IEP team. What is their IEP placement? And independent study may or may not be suitable for them.
Yeah, thank you for that, Margaret. So you may be, I mean, your kids may be back in school and you may feel safe with that and you may be fine with that, but there are many parents out there, and this is what is new in special ed right now, who are asking, can my child with disabilities enroll in and receive services through independent studies? And the short answer is yes, but that needs to be provided for in the IEP. So legally, you would need to call a meeting. It would have to happen within 30 days, and the IEP team would have to discuss whether changing the delivery method of your child's special education placement and services, whether independent study would meet their needs. That's from a distance learning guide. I think that the next slide, Margaret, would be good. If you want to take a deeper dive into this, our sister parent training information center, DREDF, over in Berkeley, did a Q&A on this when it first came out. That's a really accessible, understandable read if you'd like to know more about it, as is the EdSource quick guide. The ACLU did something. I think that's where the quote was from on the previous page. And the National Center for Youth Law has also issued some guides as a long version or a short version in PDF form that you can also use and use with schools if this is an issue for you. And hot off the press, just last week, Disability Rights California, that's DRC, DREDF, our sister agency, and the ARC did file a lawsuit on behalf of 6 families of students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, saying that the school districts across the state are failing to provide needed accommodations in distance learning for disabled students. If you have any interest in finding out more about this, Disability Rights California website, DREDF website, we'll try and keep things up to date. Again, things are changing. If there is any kind of decisions that come out of this lawsuit, we'll be telling you what they are. And just going forward, no more that we can say right now because we don't know much more. In beginning of August, all the parent training information centers in California did get together and they sponsored a presentation by Heather Calamisi and Stacy Whedon. They're both with the Special Education Division of California Department of Ed. And they talked about the overview of the budget. So just a few things to touch on. And again, you can always do a deeper dive by going to the links. But there will be 15 million in support for supporting inclusive practices. You can find out more about that at the SIP website. There's going to be 260 million for special education early intervention preschool grant. There'll be 100 million on a one-time basis to help SELPAs support member districts in alternative dispute resolution. The purpose for this funding is to prevent and resolve any kind of special education disputes resulting from COVID-19 disruptions in a collaborative and equitable manner. SELPAs have to submit a plan about it. And they need to support parent activities within this plan. And then there'll also be $300,000 to contract with a non-governmental organization that has expertise in IEP facilitation. IEP facilitation is not currently offered throughout California, although some districts and SELPAs do offer it. And really what we like to say is that all IEPs should be a facilitated IEP, meaning that there's someone who is keeping things on track, keeping the most appropriate needs of the child front and center, and not allowing conflict to get in the way, or if conflict does arise, to kind of mediate that conflict. So as I said, not all school districts offer this, but in the coming years, hopefully they will. So that's what this $300,000 is for. And then probably the one we want to leave you with, one that's probably most relevant, is that there'll be $450 million allocated to SELPers across the state to provide learning recovery support to students with disabilities associated with impacts to learning due to COVID-19. SELPas need to work with the district's LEAs to develop and submit a plan showing how they will implement things. This funding cannot be used for existing expenditures or obligations, and it certainly cannot be used for attorney's fees. So we feel that it's important that parents know about this funding. And maybe the next slide would be good, please, Margaret.
Okay, just before we do that, we put LEAs, and we put a lot of acronyms in. If you
oh yeah, thanks.
any of them, that stands for Local Education Agency, and usually it's a school district, not always, but usually that means the school district.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't spell that out, and I should have. But just to say that language matters when if you do feel that there's been regression in your child's education due to COVID and distance learning and homeschooling. Compensatory education was a term that was thrown around a lot, sort of, last April, May, not 2021, I mean 2020, when we were first in the beginning of COVID. Compensatory education is not a part of IDEA, and that's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, in case we don't know that. And it's only awarded when FAPE, which is free, appropriate public education, has been denied. It's not for regression due to COVID-19. And chances are many students have regressed. So what do we do as parents when we want to make sure that those skills are, regained, and that they have the supports and specialized programming to help with that, right? So using the language of learning loss and remediation under COVID-19, or the more current learning recovery support when talking to an IEP team, may help with making up those services. I guess next slide. I did talk about Pete Wright, Wrights Law, the Wrights Law website. Way back, I think it was in April, May of 2020, he wrote a good article on compensatory education. And there are also some other links here that talk about that. So I'm not going to spend too much more time on this, but just to know that language matters, and talking about learning recovery support, it may help in getting those services. I did say that I would provide a few more links about Wrights Law. You can tell I'm a big Wrights Law fan, but these are some good, again, they're readable. It's not only Pete Wright writing, that they have lots of other experts and professionals chiming in and writing these short articles, which are good reads and just good information for us all to have. So those are just a few more. And also that IEP pop-up tool was a very good thing in measuring progress and helping to provide accommodations. I think it's back to you now, Margaret, to talk about being
Yeah,
organized.
so trying to stay organized, and this was always my biggest
Me
challenge.
too.
I'm not the most organized person, but you know that you get a ton of paperwork. Um, you know, you have evaluations, you have IEP documents, you probably have evaluations from other organizations, you have other services you're trying to interact with. All of it generates a lot of paperwork, and uh, it's hard to stay on top of, but you really do need to. So this is going to be one of your extra chores in raising a child with a disability is learning to stay organized and keep all this paperwork under control. We generally recommend keeping a binder. You know, Alyssa and I are old enough that actual big notebooks, binder notebooks with hole punches and paper stuck in them is the way we think about being organized. If you're good in the digital world and you can keep all of your stuff organized in some kind of folder on your computer, whatever works for you, but you need to have all the important documents where you know where they are and you can find the information in them that you need. If there are any documents related to your child, particularly school documents, if you don't have a copy of last year's IEP or something of that sort, ask the school for it, because they're required to make anything in your child's file available to you. If you're having any problem, usually you can just go ask and you'll get a copy. But if you're having any problems, if you put it in writing, the law says you must get that information within 5 days. Also, anytime you have a substantive interchange with a teacher or school administrator or other agency, put it in writing. It can be email, but if you put it in email, keep your emails. Don't delete them. You know, it may even be a good idea to print them out. If you have a discussion as you're picking up your child with your child's teacher and something's agreed upon, the teacher agrees to do something differently or something of that sort, then follow up, you know, write an email to your child's teacher right after that saying, as we discussed today, you know, you agreed to do this or that, so that you have a record of these things going on. If you don't have a record and the request or the decision gets ignored, you won't have any proof that it took place. Liza referred to Pete Wright along a lot. One of his sayings is, if you prepare for every meeting as though you're going to end up in court, you probably will never end up in court, because you'll be so prepared that you won't need to take that extra step. So, you know, keeping track of everything is important. Phone log also, if you have a phone conversation, it's a good idea to write down, you know, you had a phone call with the special education director and, you know, you talked about what services your child was or wasn't getting. Keep a note of that. We also have something called an IEP toolkit, and that's on our website. And it's sometimes a good way of organizing your thoughts for an IEP meeting. And if you come to one of our IEP trainings, we'll go over that a little bit more.
Okay, back on to clear and compassionate communication being very important. And before we just get off the organizing, I want to say just a little tip that I learned to do, you know, with the advent of email. Now I'm going back a ways because my daughter is 23. But, you know, as Margaret was saying, document, and email is a really good way of doing that. So what I would do at IEP meetings, and we really didn't have contentious ones, but I just wanted everybody to know that that I was informed and I was keeping a good record of communications. I would bring a folder that was marked, you know, staff communications or teacher emails or something like that. And I would keep it on the table with me. And I wouldn't necessarily, you know, say, look what I have here, but it was something that was there so that if we did touch on any kind of, you know, touchy subject, and I would say, well, you know, in the email communication we had, and they see that it's right there and I could open to a page and say, this is what was said, this is what happened. It just helped to advance the whatever it was that we were hoping to get out of the situation. So anyway, that's just an aside. Clear and compassionate communication, always important. I guess next slide. Oh, we're big on remembering the 3 C's, we've come to call them: communication, cooperation, and collaboration. I guess next slide. Everyone on the IEP team needs to try and be flexible, compassionate, and patient. If that's what you're projecting, as with all things in life, maybe that's what you'll get back. We think it's a really good idea to acknowledge and process any emotions you may have before you step into that IEP meeting. So that's not what's first and foremost in your mind as you're attempting to, understand and contribute and learn about what's going on at the IEP meeting. So kind of try and acknowledge and process any emotions you may have about your child and your child's learning beforehand. Margaret, did you want to jump in, or were you?
No, that's fine.
No, okay. It's important to focus on your child needs and your own, but the child's needs first, because we're at the IEP team meeting where we're looking at finding the most appropriate services and program for the student. And relating to number 1, showing respect and expecting it from others is paramount. Trying to avoid making people feel defensive, not, pointing a finger and saying, well, when you did this, that caused my child to do this. Best to stay away from that blame, the blame shaming. And showing that you're grateful, being grateful, and assuming that your IEP team is doing the best that they can. In short, talk so schools will listen, and listen so schools will talk. At the meeting, there'll be some ground rules, and they may be different for video conferences. I think on the next page, we do have a link to some strategies and tips for video conferencing. I don't know how many people are actually having meetings in person now as opposed to virtual. I think a fair amount that I've heard are still virtual. Always good to get educated on the best way to address that. Having the agenda can help. Clarifying time constraints, listening and asking questions is always a good one. And, use and ask for facts rather than opinions. Although, obviously, if you have assessments reports and you're going over them, you're looking at opinions that specialists are giving, but they're based on facts. They're based on the data that came out of the assessment. Okay. So these again are some tips for IEP meetings and for virtual meetings. We're not going to go to them now, but please feel free when you are sitting in the comfort of your own home later on. And again, this is from that virtual IEP meeting tip, being patient, having a backup plan ready if technology issues arise, actively listening. You can look at them later. At the meeting, it's always good to be appreciative and acknowledge the efforts of others. And, use humor. That's always a good deflection. I mean, I don't think we ever had an IEP meeting that was less than 2 hours long. I have a kiddo who had lots of needs and got lots of services. So even with pre-meeting with folks, which is what we would do. We would have assessments, we would get the results, and then I'd ask for a meeting, about a week before the IEP with the speech language pathologist, with the OT, with the teacher, just so we could kind of map out, and I could ask all those questions beforehand, so that when we got to the IEP, we were talking mainly about, okay, these are the present levels, this is what's happening, these are the goals, this is the plan. So if that's at all possible to do, that's all in developing the relationship with the members on the IEP team. If you can do these little pre-meetings before the actual IEP meeting, that will help to make the meeting run smoother. But as I said, I mean, we had 32 goals at one point and they were long meetings. But if you use humor and you build on small agreements, and during the meeting, you repeat, you reflect, you rephrase for clarification, you'll get through it with a better understanding, and your better understanding will be obvious to the rest of the IEP meeting the IEP team, and you'll become more of a player.
And I do just want to note at this point that most school districts are understaffed at this point, and these professionals will be very, very busy. So do respect their time. If you can get these sort of pre-meetings or individual meetings, it's great. You may not be able to, just because everybody's overworked right now.
Through that, Margaret, with all the assessments that are backed up and all, because we couldn't do in-person assessments for so long. I guess, tips for written communication. Yeah. So Margaret touched on this a little bit when she was talking about the making sure that you document things. But letters or emails are best when they're sent to a person who can make change, as opposed to someone who can't. And when you keep them short, focus on 1 or 2 issues. I mean, we've had folks send us, 3-page emails, very long emails to help them review. And it's just too much. It's too much for the person on the receiving end to absorb, read, and even respond to sometimes. If a deadline is necessary, be sure to put that in, but, not in a rude way, but just in sort of, I understand that we need to call the IEP meeting. If I ask for an IEP meeting, it should be done within 30 days. And don't forget to give any kind of contact information other than your email, if that's indeed how you want to have the communication.
Okay, so perspective. So it's always important to acknowledge each other's thoughts. It's important for you to acknowledge your fears and concerns as a parent. And this, it's okay in the IEP team meeting to say, I am really worried that my child has not learned to read yet, or I am really worried about how this will affect his or her future. Acknowledging that you have concerns and fears about your child is quite acceptable and expected. You do need to empathize with the challenges that the teachers and administrators face. We know from going to various SELPA meetings and others that practically every school district in the state is looking for teachers, psychologists, speech and language pathologists. They're all having trouble getting enough staff right now. So, and here it's important to empathize with them, but you also realize it's their problem, not your problem. So just be understanding to a degree. You're still going to be persistent in getting the services your child needs. Finding common goals. Sometimes it's better to say what the goal is rather than how we're starting, not start with how we're going to get there, but start, what is the goal? Oftentimes you might be asking for something like an aid in the classroom to assist your child. Sometimes it's better to acknowledge the goal is for my child to be able to navigate school independently. However, what do we need to get to that point? Sometimes it's best to start with the goal and then go back to how you're going to get there. Rehashing the past is never very useful. Many things may have happened in the past year, the last IEP meeting. There was an unfortunate exchange with a teacher in the past or something of that sort. There really isn't anything you can do about the past. You can change the future. So that's where you need to focus. Being open-minded, we've talked about being grateful. It often helps just to acknowledge the fact that people are working hard at trying to help your child. Even if you feel they're not working hard enough, you can still appreciate what they are doing. So problem solving, always important to be flexible. And here is where, this is a very important point I'd like to focus on for a minute. Understanding the difference between a position and an interest. A position is one way to solve a problem, and an interest can be met in several different ways. Your interest is that your child learns to read. Your position is they must use this particular curriculum in order to help my child. You really need to focus on what is it you're trying to accomplish? or that you're hoping your child will be able to learn or do, and then worry about how you're going to get there, because there may be different ways to get that interest addressed. Be willing to brainstorm, throw out ideas and listen to ideas from teachers, even if some of them have to be thrown out because they end up being inappropriate, but be willing to think through different ideas. Definitely ask questions. If you feel like a teacher or a specialist is being vague about what they're doing, ask them to be more specific. And you can always call us. We're a good sounding board if you're trying to figure out how to strategize for your next IEP meeting. We're happy to help you do that. Again, focus on what you can do now, not what did or didn't happen last year. We did mention compensatory and learning loss. Yes, be aware of that, but don't rehash, small disagreements that may have happened in the past. Do document what services your child is getting or not getting. If your child's speech therapist is out sick for 2 months, they should be getting makeup sessions. So, be aware if they're getting the services that are written down in their IEP. If your child is in distance learning, do observe and record whether they seem to be accessing it. Certainly, if your child is in in-person classes, but has a lot of homework to do at home, you can observe and record how well they're able to do the work they're bringing home. To the extent you can monitor progress. I mean, this is not really, it's your school's job to monitor how well your child is progressing. But you can ask your teacher and ask the specialist to help you understand how they're monitoring progress and what they're seeing. And you should be getting progress reports on your child's IEP if they have an IEP. If you're not getting progress reports, definitely contact your case manager and say, what's the problem? I didn't seem to get a progress report when the IEP said I would. We've talked a lot about distance learning. I'll leave that for the moment, but basically, do your best to communicate and collaborate with the IEP team meeting. Don't assume they know things that that they might not have heard or learned. So do communicate all that you know about your child and what's going on. When you have a disagreement with the IEP team or with any other agency, you should try to resolve the disagreement as close to the source as possible. If you're just having a disagreement with one particular teacher, if you can sit down and work that out with a teacher, that is the best way to go. But if you can't, there's a principal, there's a special education director, there's somebody else you can go to, but always start with where the problem exists. Try to be clear about stating your concerns. Again, you're asking the school to be specific and not vague, so it's important for you to be as specific as you can. Calm and factual. Well, we all get emotional about our kids, but it's important to, as we say, deal with your emotions first and then be calm as possible in dealing with the professionals on the other end. That will make you seem more professional and more effective. When you're trying to resolve a problem, do document all the steps you've taken. I talked to this teacher, I talked to that teacher, I emailed the administrator. What did I do to try to resolve things? We've talked about administrative hierarchy. Everybody works for somebody else, including, you can, if necessary, go up to the school board, California Department of Education. There's always someone upstairs from whoever you're dealing with. But in the end, what's really important is that you try to maintain a good relationship. In all likelihood, you're going to be dealing with the same administrators and therapists and professionals for a long time, and you don't want to get to the point where you can't have a positive interaction with them. So try to keep on their good side, even if you're disagreeing. Try to be agreeable about your disagreement. it's always good to separate the person from the problem and not get too personal, not to attack people, talk about the problem, not the individual. Realizing that none of us have all the answers. And make sure, if you're stating facts in an IEP meeting, make sure you double check, make sure you're correct before you say things. Choose your battles. Don't argue over things that are irrelevant, and they could be very annoying to you. But if it's not relevant to your child's success and future at school, maybe you can just let certain things go. Do calls for help. And we've already talked about this, but resolving conflict at the lowest level possible is always a good idea. Don't make it a big deal if you can solve it easily. So conflict resolution at the lowest level, we've talked about this. This is a little bit repetitive, but just be ready to go up the ladder. If the teacher doesn't help, go to the principal, go to the special education director if necessary, go to the district director, go to the school board. There are ways you can move up the ladder if you need to. There is a Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution, and this website is a great place to understand how that works. We get lots of calls about the conflicts that are going on, and we are happy to talk through those with you and make suggestions. Connect with people who you think can make a difference and make decisions. You can always call an IEP meeting, 30 days notice. If you want to have an IEP meeting, write a letter or write an email, ask for an IEP meeting. It needs to be scheduled within 30 days. You can all, if it seems like an emergency, you can ask for an emergency meeting. There isn't really something called an emergency IEP meeting, but you can always ask that it happen quicker, but 30 days is what the law says. A facilitated IEP meeting. Some districts have facilitators who are not the school personnel you're used to working with, who can come in and, just help moderate a meeting. If you're having a conflict of personalities or you feel like you're not being listened to, this might be one way to go. There is a service called Alternative Dispute Resolution. That's a non-legal process that is available in most school districts, where there's an independent person or someone from the SELPA can try to negotiate a settlement or an agreement between you and the school district. It's voluntary and you don't have to accept the resolution, but sometimes it's a good way to get things resolved without having to feel like you need to go to due process. Due process is your right to file for due process if you have a disagreement. And we do have a workshop on, it's actually a two-part workshop on due process, on your rights and remedies through that. And sometimes if you do file for due process, the result is resolved in mediation and not actually going to a quasi-judicial hearing situation. Sometimes it's just resolved through mediation. So realize that that's also an option that's available. If you need to, there is a state compliance complaint process. That's if there are things written in your child's IEP that are not being done, it's not being carried out as written, or if you think there's a problem with things like timelines not being met, you can go to the State Department of Education website and file a complaint. And there is also due process. That's the way when you really come to a conflict that you can't resolve through non-judicial means, you can always file for due process. It's a serious step to take, and you don't want to do it unless you have to, but knowing that you can sometimes is important. And at this point, back to Alyssa.
So after all that heavy talk about resolving conflict, hopefully there isn't much conflict out there, but from some of the chat, I think that there may be. So, we'll get to that in the Q&A and potentially other phone calls. But self-care is not selfish. And I know that we say that, we believe it, we know it, but it's really hard to practice it all the time. So how do we practice self-care? I mean, unless you've had your head under a rock, you know what these things are, right? Get rest, exercise, healthy food. Your school and even your children are not everything, right? Consider family harmony and well-being. Consider integrating those siblings, if they exist, into what happens. Consider the relationship between you and that sibling. Enjoy activities around your child's schedules when at all possible, family, and like I said, separate, you with the child with disability, you with the sibling. Connect with people who give you encouragement and hope. You know, it really doesn't do anybody any good to keep people who only provide negativity in your life, or judgment, or control. I mean, life is short, and we all know, if we're parents of kids with disabilities, our lives are stressful enough already. There's this underlying level of stress and anxiety. So you want to surround yourself with people who give you encouragement and hope and positivity. You know, I wish I did that earlier. I wish I took a mindfulness-based stress reduction class 30 years ago. I only came to the practice about 7 years ago. And in fact, Matrix has given mindfulness-based stress reduction classes, which I facilitate with a colleague, specifically for parents of kids with special needs. We, of course, haven't done it because it's really best done in person. So watch for that. We may be bringing it back. I hope we do. And try not to feel guilty if you take that little time for yourself. You know, if you want to take that 15-minute walk after dinner, you know, the sky's not going to fall. Everything's not going to fall around you. Give some time to yourself. Be gentle with yourself. Ask for help when you need it. Try not to give into that resentment or frustration. I mean, everybody does at times, but you know, it's helpful if you don't. and make that self-care a habit. We've done a couple of special expresses on stress reduction. If you go to our website under resources, under the Matrix newsletters, you can find them. We have several links to several places. But I think it's probably important to remember that we are the role models for our children, and how we manage our stress, our growth, our change. They're watching that all the time. So it's good to maintain some level of self-care. It'll help you, and it'll help all those around you. I love this quote, and I think we'd be remiss in any kind of advocacy training if we didn't mention that, yes, you can and could and will and are a good advocate for your child or grandchild. But you don't have to stop there. You could be a good advocate for others. You could work toward being a parent leader. You could get involved on the local, regional, or state level advocating for school change or school reform. For never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. I went through a bunch of things that are new in special education, but like I said, constantly evolving, daily, weekly, monthly. So if you want to get involved in something like that, we did mention these CAC meetings earlier on in the key players section. CAC meetings are a wonderful way to get involved, to have your voice be heard, and to connect with like-minded parents, but also with special ed directors or program managers or people within the district. It's supposed to be a forum where the parent group advises or learns from, and the school group advises and learns from. It's supposed to work symbiotically. If you, I don't know where everyone is from with the advent of the virtual training. We get people from Tennessee sometimes. But if you are within one of the Matrix catchment areas, which I'll talk about in a little bit, this is a link where you can find out the CACs in the counties that we serve. You know, there are several levels of volunteering and opportunities to become involved. Working in the classroom, the PTA, the special ed PTA, Parent Teacher Association, but I figure everybody knows that acronym, right? You can attend school site council meetings or board meetings. And on the state level, You can investigate the California Special Education Advisory Commission that's made up of parents of kids with special eds, and they deal with state level issues, or the California State Department of Education. When you lead by example and encourage your child to get involved, good things happen. And clearly, the gift of self-advocacy is huge. I can't even say enough about how I wish I would have involved my daughter sooner in IEP meetings. And I think if I did, she would have been running them by the time she was, 20 or 18. So this "nothing about us without us" is a quote from a James Charlton book. And it's meant to express the conviction that people with disabilities, that they know what is best for them. So here are a bunch of a few videos, and then a bunch of resources that are meant to be shared with your youth. And it's never too young. They're never too young to start teaching self-advocacy. Do you want to wear a blue shirt or a red shirt? Let them make the choices they can. Because where does that self-confidence, that self-reliance, the self-esteem, the self-determination, where does that come from? How do we help support the self-advocacy of all people with disabilities? It kind of falls to us as Parent Training Information Center, and to us as parents, to ask the youth, how can we help you send your message? To encourage youth to understand that their disability and their rights, and to build the capacity for the youth to join in the conversation. And to understand that it's not we who are teaching them, but they who are going to teach us. So please teach your children well, share these resources with them. Self-advocacy is a skill that could and should be taught early and often. So why not start now? And that is definitely my soapbox on that. So just to bring it back in closing, to remind you that collaboration equals success. The communication, the cooperation that you have with your IEP team, and any team that you work with with your child's in your child's lifespan, that teamwork is so essential and important. The parents and professionals could be partners, maintaining good relationships, working together toward those common goals that Margaret was talking about, even if they're small ones. But we always want to remember we're working toward the most appropriate services, the most appropriate program. And sometimes when parents come in and start talking about, I want what's best, sometimes that word best, as opposed to the word appropriate, that kind of rubs people the wrong way, because we all want what's best for our kids, right? But the law states appropriate, free, appropriate public education. I mentioned that acronym a while ago, FAPE. So you want to start training yourself to use the word appropriate. What is the most appropriate goals? How are we going to work together to reach those appropriate goals? Recognize that roles and things change, issues change. Draw on everyone's different skills and strengths. Margaret did mention everyone at that IEP team meeting table, they all are experts in something. You are expert in your child. Become informed, become knowledgeable, and become a valued member of that IEP team meeting, and solve problems together. We are a federal parent training information center. We're designated by the Office of Special Education, U.S. Department of Education, and we cover from 18 counties in Northern California for children birth through 26. We are also a California Family Resource Center, and in Marin, Sonoma, and Solano, we serve families of infants and toddlers, which are also in that PTI category because it's 0 to 26. But the Family Resource Center is from 0 to 3 years old. So we kind of specialize in helping folks with early start. If you've had kids in early start, you know what that is. I'm not going to go into it, but also with the transition from early start to preschool. So we're certainly able to help with that. And we're also a California Family Empowerment Center designated by the California Department of Education. And we serve Napa, Solano, and Sonoma counties as an FEC. So there's more about this on our website if you want to read more about it, but I kind of threw out some terms. I was talking about a PTI and our sister agency. I just want to let you know just a bit about that. And that this presentation was funded by, next slide, partially by ideas that work. And as I said, no donation is too small. So if you're so inclined, please go to our website, or here's the donate button if you happen to be looking at the PDF later.